Okay, welcome back. Please take your seats. This next panel, Resourcing the Field, Igniting Philanthropic Investment, is something I've worked in this field for 12 years. And for 12 years, most of those in federal government, I met with different philanthropic funders and said, how can we attract philanthropic investment in this work of keeping our communities safe and more inclusive? How can we attract philanthropic investment into this work of preventing hate-filled violence? We were delighted. We did a call for proposals this year for the summit. We received 204 proposals for sessions. If you think there's a lot happening right now, just imagine if there were 204 sessions happening. But one of those proposals came from a dear friend of mine, Ryan Greer, president of Bedrock. And he said, I would love to get some funders who are funding this work around the country onto stage to talk about philanthropic perspective. You've heard some government funders on this stage, but a philanthropic perspective of what they look for and their role in fueling this field. Ryan, welcome up with your panel.
Well, before we get started, I wanted to welcome you all. My name is Amber Farr. I'm the Executive Director of Grant Makers of Western Pennsylvania. Just want to say a couple brief remarks before the panel gets started. And so, thank you for coming to this plenary session, Resourcing the Field, Igniting Philanthropic Investment. It is a true honor to gather with all of you here in Pittsburgh, a city renowned for its rich philanthropic history and commitment to social progress. As we embark on today's discussion, let's take a moment to appreciate the profound legacy of giving that surrounds us. Pittsburgh has long been a hub of transformative philanthropy, shaping not only our local communities, but also making a significant impact on national and global initiatives. This spirit of generosity is crucial as we confront the urgent challenges posed by hate in our society. In this session, we will engage leaders from prominent philanthropic institutions to explore the vital role of philanthropy in supporting the field of hate prevention. Our conversation will focus on identifying successful grant-seeking strategies, sharing current philanthropic investments in hate prevention programs, and providing an overview of the 2025 outlook for support in this crucial area. The most recent Giving USA report highlights just how significant charitable giving is, with over $557 billion contributed in 2023, and foundation giving surpassing the $100 billion mark for the second consecutive year. This extraordinary support underscores the essential role that philanthropy plays in advancing social change, particularly in the field of hate prevention. So again, thank you for being here, for your dedication to this crucial work, and for your belief in a future where love triumphs over hate. Let's engage deeply in our conversations today, inspired by the legacy of philanthropy within the city of Pittsburgh and across the country and the world, and be motivated by the positive change we can achieve together. And with that, I will turn it over to Ryan to introduce our panel. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amber. And thank you, Brett, and the Eradicate Hate team, everyone. This has been a phenomenal experience. Thank you. And if you're in the room, let me start with that. Thank you for everything you're doing. Your job, whatever it is, a lot of different jobs in the room, your job's too hard. You don't have as much support as you deserve in doing it. Let's just acknowledge that. Let me just say, we on stage, we see you and we are grateful for you. And let's start there. Because if it feels like you don't have enough resources to do your work, that's not surprising. It's unfortunate, but not surprising. According to a study by the Rand Corporation, they looked at peer countries. I'm talking about the United States, but they looked at countries like Canada and Germany, and countries that are developed enough and prioritize hate fuel violence prevention enough to invest in it. And they said that if the United States invested on the level that our peer countries invest financially in preventing hate fuel violence, we would spend $290 million per year. That's what the target would be compared to per capita rates for those other countries. According to our research, the United States spends less than 1/4 of that. So if it feels like you don't have enough resources, that's understandable. You know, Bedrock is a hate fuel violence field supporting hub. We have 62 organizational partners, and we ask them every quarter, what is your top priority and what is your top challenge? And every quarter, resourcing is the top challenge. Sometimes it's our work's in too high demand to keep up with. Sometimes it's we don't have enough staff. And sometimes we can actually just put the words to it, which is there's not enough money. And then a lot of those partners are reliant on federal line items that have to fight for their lives every political cycle and are still too small. So we have to diversify. And so we look to institutional philanthropy for that leadership. And before we get into what that leadership looks like, let me just mention 2 things we're not going to do on this panel. One, I would love to, as a practitioner myself, to join my fellow practitioners in shaking our fists at the institutional philanthropists who chose not to invest in these issues. We can fist shake another time. That's for another day. And 2, no pitching. I'm not up here to ask for funding from these lovely folks. If you see them in the hallway, the best way to say hello is hello, no pitching, please. Okay, disclaimer's done. That's what we're not going to do. Here's what we are going to do. We're going to be able to learn from 3 different institutional philanthropy organizations and leaders in the field, because they are the leaders who did the right thing and invested in political violence prevention and hate fuel violence prevention, and all from different angles. Now, they'll all use the term democracy a lot, and they're all members of the Democracy Funders Network. Shout out Democracy Funders Network. But they all have different ways of operating, reasons why they've come to be in the political violence prevention field. And so we'll be able to learn and kind of demystify some of institutional philanthropy from at least these 3 perspectives. And so I want to thank our 3 panelists for their leadership, because my guess is it was a hard-won battle to be able to be in this space. So thank you for doing it. And now let's learn from them. We have 3 all-stars from institutional philanthropy. We've got Carla Bernal from Pivotal Ventures, we've got Ben Chow from Packard Foundation, and we've got Brad Rourke from the Kettering Foundation. 3 of my favorite people to work with. Thank you all so much for joining us here today. And we're going to start you each off with a tough question, a big question, and then we'll just kind of take it from there. So I'd love to start with Ben, and then Carla, then Brad. Why? Why did your organization, in Ben's case, the Packard Foundation, why did you choose to invest in hate fuel violence and political violence prevention, and kind of why your angle? How did we get here today? Ben, thank you, and kick us off.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks again to all of you for being here today. I work at the Packard Foundation, as Ryan mentioned, and here at the Packard Foundation, we decided to enter into the political violence space because one of the areas that we're working in is believing in advancing a thriving, resilient, and pro-equity American democracy. Now, when we talk about democracy to us is about the peaceful transfer of power, and therefore political violence is the opposite, or anathema, to democracy, right? We cannot have violence if we're going to have democracy. And so in that sense, we also think about it as authoritarianism is the opposite of democracy, right? Authoritarians, they benefit even before they get into power by being able to leverage things like chaos, right? Violence, fear. And so when we're thinking about this, fear-mongering, how authoritarians can use that to their benefit, we want to get involved because we want to say, no, if we want to have a strong, resilient democracy, we need to put violence to a minimum, at rest. And as a result, that's how we got into political violence, as a reason for a thriving democracy must be able to exist only when political violence has been made to its minimum. That's how we got involved.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Carla Bernal. I'm with Pivotal Ventures. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, Pivotal Ventures is a social impact company founded by Melinda French Gates. And so our work also builds on building a healthy and equitable democracy. Our strategy is centered on building women's political power in states. So there's an electoral side of it where we're focused on getting women in politics at the state level. And then there's the non-political side of it, the systems-focused side, which is where I am entering here, is to focus on the structural barriers that make it harder for them to run and serve and lead while they are in office. And that is why we've invested in the hate-fueled violence space and countering that, because we've seen the incredible chilling effect that threats of violence and political violence has made on women in politics. We're thinking about, we're just a few weeks away from elections. 80% of election officials are women. We really want to make sure that they are safe in doing their jobs in political leadership and public life. And for us, addressing this head on is a huge priority, although we are newer in the space, precisely because we cannot have a healthy democracy if only a select few feel safe enough to participate and lead. So that is why we've decided to make a handful of investments in this space, and we're learning alongside so many of my partners here on the stage.
And I'm Brad Rourke with the Charles F. Kettering Foundation. The Kettering Foundation is a nonprofit, nonpartisan operating foundation. So not a grant maker foundation, but an operating foundation. We're focused solely on advancing and defending inclusive democracy. And we do that through focusing on countering authoritarianism, upholding government accountability, and fostering citizen engagement. One of the reasons I think I'm on this panel also is I'm manifestly older than everyone here and have been in the philanthropy space for some time, and I just want to re-emphasize the difference in our organizations that you see before us here. So we've got a traditional grant maker, we've got a public impact corporation, hybrid organization, operating foundation focused solely on advancing inclusive democracy, and there's others too. So I'm mindful that this group is interested in understanding some potential funding and resourcing strategies. So I just want to name other types of entities that you might want to have in mind, and if we can touch on them as we talk. Community foundations,
Yeah.
Donor-advised funds, individuals of means. So those are three that are not represented on this stage, and if we can, we'll try to, I think, try to provide some thinking about how to talk to some of those as well.
Thanks, Brad. And take a minute on that, because institutional philanthropy is not a monolith. And even for you all on stage, you're not just writing checks. You're doing a number of things. And maybe all of you weigh in on this, but I want to pass this back to you, Brad. I mean, you guys are, a once-in-a-generation level convener. Bedrock has one of our official partners, shout out Ohio Democracy Project, we got solely through a Kettering convening. So that's one way you engage. Walk us through kind of how else you engage besides writing checks.
Yeah, thanks for that. As I mentioned, we're an operating foundation, so we work in partnership with other organizations. So one of the ways that we do that is to develop a substantive partnership. Another is, as you mentioned, Ryan, is convenings. So, and these convenings are always brought forth with an idea that there's actually an argument to be made about whatever topic. So it's not a convening, say, to explore in an open-ended way a topic. As an example, we held a convening in January in Washington, D.C. on political violence. January is an obvious time to hold a convening on political violence for obvious reasons. And part of the point there was to bring in, for instance, a conversation about security of elections and election protection and office holders, but also we brought in one of our senior fellows, Kelly Robinson, who is president of the Human Rights Campaign, who brought a message about the fundamental need for all people, especially and including threatened populations to have a full ability to participate without intimidation in democracy, that it's not a democracy without that. So our intent there with that convening was to bring not just a worry about political violence, but to make a point. And so convenings, and then also we're very grateful to have a number of really best-in-class senior fellows, including people like Kelly, including people like James Comey, former FBI director, who are focused in the democracy and in the political violence space, and we work on amplifying their words as well.
Yeah, I'll continue off of that, and I'll add, like, in addition to the many ones that you mentioned, Brad, there's also corporations, right, for-profit companies out there that many I've met since yesterday that are present here that are looking to expand their philanthropic footprint in giving in the hate-fueled violence space as well. So I would encourage everyone to also look at your local businesses and your communities as potential partners here as well. The Packard Foundation, we are, as Brad mentioned, a more traditional operating foundation. And so these are very similar. If you think of the big name foundations like the Gates, Ford Foundation, the Hewlett Foundation, we're very similar to them in that sense. And what makes us like them is a few things. One, we are a perpetual foundation, and by that I mean we do not have an end date as to when we need to shut down and give out all of our funding. At the Packard Foundation, we give about $400 million a year to charitable organizations. Of course, not all to hate-fueled violence, and we have a small segment of that. Most of us, as the large operating foundations, we also do not accept public-facing applications. We hire in-house program officers like myself to go into the field and find out which are the organizations that are doing great work, and most importantly, are doing work that are aligned with our theory of change. And what I mean by theory of change is, generally for large operating foundations, we have a strategic mindset, a strategic board, which means that we usually adopt sometimes between 5, 10, maybe even 15-year strategies out into the future to say, in 10 years from now, I would like to see hate-fueled violence be X, right? And so in order to get there, we'll have so many different sub-strategies. So my job as a program officer is to go out into the field and find out which organizations are mission aligned in the same way of wanting to see hate-fueled violence become X by 10 years. And so therefore, that's what our jobs are to do. Another thing about, I think, a large operating foundation that might also be similar to all of us here is that we try to do multi-year grants. We try at the Packard Foundation to do at least minimum 3-year grant funding for our partners organizations. Of course, it may vary. If you're a more startup organization, we may give you 1-year funding to see how you perform in the first year to try and seed your growth. But generally speaking, we also try to minimize our reporting burdens for all of our grantee organizations to give you the maximum flexibility to do your work.
I should probably make a point here and just share a little bit about our model, since we are relatively new to the public-facing side. So we've been around since 2015. And it wasn't until maybe last year, a year and a half ago, that we now have a website. You now know who we are. And our model is a little bit different. We are short-term catalytic investors. So we are not giving long-term, multi-year support. We are investing in innovation and innovative, interesting ideas that the field has that is targeted to advancing women's power and influence in the US, and most recently with Melinda's $1 billion commitment earlier this year, globally as well. So ours is a little bit of a different model. So our strategy is really focused on the next few years. What can we do now, both on the immediate impact that we can make, but also some policy solutions that we can start seeding.
I have infinity follow-up questions. First of all, great flag that you don't necessarily have kind of an open process for applications. So let's say I'm at the Richard Collins III Foundation and I don't know Ben. I think you do know Ben, but pretend you don't know Ben. Like, how do I find a Ben or a Carla or a Brad? Like, how do I navigate that in a way that is not stalkery, but is nonetheless like an efficient way to kind of access a complementary and kind of right-sized fit for our organization?
I'll jump in here.
Jump in.
Yeah.
Most, and I know I speak for the Packard Foundation, and even within Packard Foundation, I speak for myself. Most foundations will have an email or contact information for your specific program officer. I know my email is on my website for the Packard Foundation. you should email me. Okay, I know that's, I know.
Email Ben, everybody.
Email Ben,
You should email
everyone.
me. You should honestly email me. And if worst case scenario is I'll say no, right? That's the worst case scenario. Best case scenario, you get a conversation and we can talk. And the idea is when you do this, at least you're putting yourself vulnerable, but it's a very short email. And very simply what I'll do, honestly, is I'll look into your website, I'll look at what you send me. If you send me a document, great. You really don't need to send me more than 1 or 2 sentences because generally speaking, I think I fund a number of folks, the Packard Foundation funds a number of folks here, and I will, number one, go to other grantees that we already fund to ask them about you. And then secondly, look into the work that you're doing to see if you're mission aligned or not. And third, see if you have the trust in the community. So that's what I really look for when we look at organizations that want to look for funding here. So I would say go ahead and try. Send that email, and worst case scenario, you'll get a no.
And I could just build on that. Absolutely send the email. You know, it's our job to talk to you. So don't worry about sending the email or sending the LinkedIn message or, you know, as someone in the philanthropy industry, in the sector, we're not experts in the field and we're not the doers of the work. And we're here to enable the doers of the work and those who are experts in the field and on the ground. So I do regard it as a trust that I hold dear, that, you know, we try to be responsive. I would also say a couple other points. One is, you know, so how do I know that my work might be on mission for an organization? And so one way is to, most of us have a mission on our websites, but we also put out, typically are communicating. So we're putting out reports, or like in the case of the Kettering Foundation, we've got a podcast, The Context, by my colleague Alex Lovett. We've got a web show, we've got a blog from Many We that gives you a sense of the topics that are important in our mindset. And you can find hooks and important connections with your own work through looking at those. And then finally, I would say the philanthropy community gathers in many places. And often, you know, I know there's resource questions sometimes, but if there are ways to be where other folks in the philanthropy community are gathering, say Council on Foundations, and other organizations or other convenings like that, those can be very efficient in developing informal relationships that you can then follow up on and maybe have a more substantive conversation. So absolutely show up to the gathering spots that you can find.
Yeah, showing up to events like these are huge. I will say the one difference is I probably know about you before you know about me. Because we are not as public facing, I do a lot of, this is a personal me, not pivotal we, but I do a lot of intel finding through grantee partners that we're already currently funding, through other funders. I also have relationships with individual donors. So I'm probably finding you first by the time that you reach out to me, and I already have a profile about you. But if you don't know me, then you can always feel free to reach out to me, reach out to Ryan, who can connect us as well.
That was very sneakily worded. You're not an intel operative.
Yeah.
What you mean is if folks in the audience, if they're putting themselves out there regularly, then in theory, people talk and they might find your way. You might also use a function like, I've used candid.org, which is a foundation directory, and that's how you might find mission-aligned foundations. I'm gonna ask you about mission alignment in a second, but in theory, that might be a way to find them, and then you follow their work, you follow what they put out in the world, and you go to their convenings, and then at the end of the day, they're humans, like these nice humans who just offered to let you email them, which was really nice. Thank you. You should do it. Use that Google for Ben Chow Packard Foundation. So yeah, let me hear more about the mission alignment. How do you know you're mission aligned to make sure you're the right fit for a foundation?
I can start. I mean, for us, it's a really strong imperative. All of our work has an intersectional focus. So a lot of the funding that we do has a gender and race lens. That's like the first filter that we do. And then for my specific work, because I am focused on political power building, so again, there's the electoral side of it, but then there's like the systems change part of it that I'm happy to have a conversation on, and obviously we're here in a hate-fueled violence summit. that we also focus on, as long as your institution is working to drive change to address racism, misogyny, and working towards building political power, I think there could be a fit. Again, I'm happy to have a conversation to see if it is a good fit for us. But the first two lenses, gender and race, is primary focus for us.
So different than what Carla mentioned in terms of gender and race, at Packard we're looking at, are you addressing the populations that are most susceptible to political violence? And if you're not doing that, then you're probably not within our specific lens, right? And so within, what do we mean by most susceptible to political violence? If you do a quick Google search to see who are the people who commit political violence the most, you'll probably see religion, you'll probably see veterans, you'll probably see so on and so forth. Our work is focused on these narrow communities. So number one, faith. Certain faiths that we can talk about, and you can Google which ones are most obvious. We talk about veterans, we talk about law enforcement, we talk about businesses as a way to potentially influence people who are committing political violence, because almost everyone has a job, and so we can influence that way. We also look at geography, specifically in terms of places like swing states, like here in Pennsylvania, where tensions are probably running pretty high and political violence might be committed at higher levels. So those are the areas that we are looking at for potential grant opportunities for our theory of change.
And you can hear we're all focused on protecting a vision of an equitable democracy that's inclusive and is there for everybody. And Kettering's no different, where we're nonpartisan, but we're not neutral when it comes to protecting inclusive democracy and that vision of inclusive democracy. So that's one screen for mission fit, is to say, is that part of also your vision? And if it is, that's fantastic. We also are very interested in, speaking for us, and this is allied with and maybe building on what Ben was saying, is focusing on the populations that are most threatened in today's world, both on a state-by-state basis and in a community basis. So there are populations who are actively being and historically have been pushed out of, threatened out of, intimidated out of democracy. So LGBTQ, communities of color, women, Gen Z is also an area that we have a great deal of focus, because the most diverse generation, and so susceptible on many fronts to all of the same worries that we all have about political intimidation and violence.
So kind of like that, what you just heard is, we're kind of the two different sides of the coin, right? Brad is focused on those who violence is being committed upon. We at Packard, we're focused on who are committing the incidents of violence. And so different target populations for who you want to seek funding from based on what our theories of change are.
And in theory, you all have theories of change, just like a practitioner is sitting there thinking, I have a theory of change, I have a logic model, I gotta make sure my metrics meet the theory of change and all that. You all have theories of change yourselves, and so in theory, there's kind of a Russian nesting doll concept where your portfolio organizations, they should have theories of change that fit your theories of change, right? And I'd like to pull the thread, Ben, and Brad mentioned kind of the populations that you're worried about. And let me go back to Brad for a quick second, because you mentioned, for example, I'm going to mention immigrants and people perceived as immigrants. I think right now, I'm very nervous about that population. And as an Ohio-based organization, I mean, if I'm thinking about the people of Springfield, Ohio, have you thought about this question, your fellow Ohioans, how to best help them? Is that part of the portfolio?
Yeah, Kettering is based in Dayton, Ohio, which is very near to Springfield, Ohio, which has become as you all know, a flashpoint for political violence, intimidation, and the kind of attack on the Haitian immigrant community in that place. And so absolutely, we're very, very interested in and concerned with the communities there. And I think that one of the things that that I take away from thinking about that is and in talking to folks who are on the ground there is very mindful that a national response or a sense of like sort of swooping in and helping the community is maybe not the thing that is required now. And so really listening to the folks who are on the ground and what are the in-community needs of that community there. So one is to try to have a certain amount of humility in entering that space. Obviously, what's happening there is unique in particular. It is also not unlike the kinds of things that happen elsewhere. And so there are some potential strategies that could be used to help in that regard that are more generic. Well, I don't mean that in a one-size-fits-all way, but more types of strategies. So one obviously would be to work on messages that are in-group messaging to folks who would be prone to engaging in violence. So, you know, like the business community has an opportunity to speak up, and that in itself is fraught. You know, there was a business owner who took the step of posting a video that was in support of Haitian employees, and then he has now been the recipient of a great deal of hate. But then also I'm in touch with a number of folks. So, you know, I'm thinking about the Ohio Democracy Project, whom you talked about, the Ohioans Against Extremism, who are thinking about creating infrastructure, information infrastructure that can be used quickly by communities that when things like this happen. So that, like, how can we develop a threat tracker in our place so that we know what's happening, and then and how can we respond quickly with palliative measures when things happen. And so I would urge you to go. She'll hate me for this. Go find Jennifer Cohen of the Ohio Democracy Project. Is she? Yeah. Where is she? Who is really thoughtful about the kinds of things that could be cross-community and useful in episodes like this.
So we do need narratives of inclusion and belonging. We don't need the 2,000-mile screwdriver from DC. Right, we need local solutions and to kind of work with Ohio-based organizations, whether that's Ohio Democracy Project or Kettering. Thanks, Brad. Great point.
Oh, can I add one thing?
Add one thing.
Sorry, the faith community has been critical, and one of our senior fellows, Reverend William Barber, visited Springfield recently for a vigil that I would just, he's been finding, and we've been finding that the faith community in Springfield has been pivotal.
Awesome. And maybe, Ben, do you want to pick up on faith communities? Because, I mean, faith is so important to so many key stakeholders who are doing the important work, like in Springfield, but also elsewhere. So, Ben, do you want to just pick up on how you all see community and faith in particular in terms of your theory of change?
Yeah, so at Packard, we borrow a lot from our grantees who work on what we call peace building, especially groups who have done work abroad in places where genocide, civil war, so on and so forth, these horrible atrocities have taken place, and have these international frameworks and are applying them domestically here in the United States now. One of them puts people on a scale of 1 through 5. 5 being your extremists, and 1 being people who believe that even if we have differences, we can resolve them peaceably, whether through debate or some other kind of civil discourse. Here at Packard, we're focused on the 3s and the 4s. I defined the 4s as people who went to insurrection on January 6th, but didn't go inside the Capitol. So I'm talking about pretty extreme folks. And then 3s we describe as people who were probably sitting at home watching it on TV and not sure if they should have joined or not. Okay, so we're not talking about your ordinary champions for peace, not at all. These are not the folks that we're funding. We're funding the 3s and the 4s. And so this is also irrespective of politics. You can have people on the far left or the far right being your 5s, right? It does not have to be a political belief whatsoever. When we take into mind consideration right now at this point in time, when we talk about certain faiths, I am someone who grew up non-denominational but adjacent to the Southern Baptist Convention, and I've seen a lot of my friends and families become 3s and 4s now. And so a lot of our work are focused on evangelicals. And so in this sense, what can we do? Focus on the community that we're talking about, evangelicals, work within the evangelical community to build that muscle of resilience, to believe that peace is the better alternative rather than violent extremism. And so examples of one organization that we fund is called GlocalNet, that pairs together a white evangelical pastor and a black evangelical pastor from cities across the country. They're in 15 cities now, to bring them and their congregations together to do joint activities, whether it's poll watching, whether it is to do service projects together, to do community work together, to do prayer breakfasts, all of these activities as a way so that when incidents of violence or election denialism take place in their local communities, for example, like if it happened in Butler County, Pennsylvania, that you have both black and white evangelical pastors stand up and say, we do not condone this violence. In fact, we're going to do activities to kind of tone down the rhetoric. That's the type of activities that we're looking for. How do we build that muscle within the communities that are most susceptible? So the foil to us in the evangelical space is white Christian nationalism. How do we build a muscle against that within the community itself that's most susceptible?
And in my experience, they're hungry for it, right? I was fortunate enough to be included in the Parsonage Project's convening of 250 Christian clergy nationwide, and they were hungry for how do we advance peace here? And so giving them the tools that we develop here at Eradicate Hate and putting those in the hands of those faith leaders can be hugely impactful. Carla, I want to turn to you for a second. So I want to just channel a conversation I had with Pat from Life After Hate. Shout out Life After Hate team. Pat liked to say to me, he said, we engage violent extremists to try to disengage them from those movements. And some of the people we engage are ISIS supporters. Some are Latinos for white supremacy. Some are women for Proud Boys. There's huge diversity in terms of who is signing up for these violent movements. Mm-hmm. But he said they all have two things in common. They're anti-Semites and they're misogynists. Yep. Let me follow up on the latter point here. Misogyny is the lifeblood of hate-fueled violence. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna say it again. Misogyny is the lifeblood of hate-fueled violence.
Thank you, Ryan. Yep, yep.
So as an organization whose job is to elevate women to leadership roles that they deserve to be in, while also navigating this tension with the all too common presence of misogyny, how are you navigating that?
Very delicately. Very delicately. So yes, I think a couple more points on that. So what we found and why we're invested in this space is that not only are women and women of color in public life, and politics in particular for us, are fielding incredible threats, but the severity is so much worse for them. It's not just attacking them as individuals, it's attacking their families, their children, their loved ones. So when we are thinking of safety and security for women in public life, it's not just them, it's entire networks in their system that we have to think supports for, because it's not just the individual. The other thing that we're finding is that sometimes it's actually not as helpful to elevate their gender and race when trying to talk about safety and security. It really isn't. You can see examples of this in the media right now. We're in election season. That is actually causing a little bit more targeting than what we want. It's spotlighting them for the wrong reasons. And so there are one organization and then one leader I want to highlight here. The good news is that women are actually on the front lines of democracy, spearheading all sorts of policy solutions already. You had mentioned Project Over Zero, who's also in Ohio. We also fund them as one of our partners, and I will talk about their Arizona work. I don't know if Over Zero is in here, but they have an incredible group of evangelical women that they're working with to basically address the kinds of threats, misogynist, hate-fueled threats in Arizona, which we are tracking right now, obviously a high, tense situation. And then the other leader I want to spotlight is an assembly member in California who we are looking at different solutions for women candidates and electeds, who just got a bill signed into law that allows them to use campaign funds for security expenses. that just basic policy solutions like that are available, and there are blueprints for that. And that's what I would probably want to lift up more than, you know, the severity of the attack that they're facing right now.
Yeah, and thank you, Carla. And Brad, I don't know if you want to pick up on the LGBTQ community, who's also, the trend lines there are also very very alarming, excuse me. And so, Brad, I know you work with them a bit. If you could shed some light on kind of, similarly, how do we empower that community to be leaders while also, you know, balancing the fact that they're increasingly under threat?
You know, I think absolutely that's true, and I know that Over Zero recently did a pretty comprehensive report on political violence aimed at LGBTQ individuals and populations that just makes the case of how anti-democratic and dangerous that can be, not just in the U.S. but globally, and many of the, in terms of political violence, trends that we see and are worried about and are concerned about in the U.S. are actually global ones as well, and are deserving of our global concern as well. But I think there's a connection that can also be made in terms of connecting. There's a broad-based and potent civil rights community that speaks for and works with many of the threatened populations that we're talking about. So that, like I mentioned the Human Rights Campaign earlier, the LGBTQ community has a number of organizations and movements and networks that are supportive. Other populations as well, NAACP, Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. I think there are connections that can be made from that world to the democracy world, to the pro-democracy world that are concrete and can make the case that power for the LGBTQ community is a pro-democracy power as well, and targeting of those communities is also an anti-democratic move as well. And so then you can get broader coalitions building up out of that. So that's one of our strategies, is to try to connect those two worlds in ways that intellectually they're connected, but they're not in the same rooms all the time. And if we can help them to have more episodes where they are in those same rooms, the better.
Yeah, and not only should the civil liberties community join in this type of effort, but sometimes they're the same community. And let me just state as affirmatively as possible, because there was some conversation yesterday about, you know, is it helpful to criminalize speech to address hate-fueled violence? Let me state as affirmatively as possible. We need free speech and we need civil liberties, not because, not despite of our work, but because of our work. Our work is better when we join forces with civil liberties activists, but also abide by the principles and values of civil liberties. Our work is stronger by, we can engage with conspiracy theories to debunk them better when we live by our values. And so I think that's a great point, Brad, to bring them into the conversation and do it together. And maybe that's a good segue to what I want to talk about, which is, let's do it all together, right? There's so many people at Eradicate Hate with a brilliant theory of change, a pilot project, a fund, and we want to figure out kind of what's next. And I want to hear from you all, you know, are you worried about a tumultuous 6 months or so, as I am, and how you're going to kind of brave through that? But also, we've got to look forward. We've got to be able to get beyond 2-week increments in how we think about this work. So I want to hear kind of what you think of as the outlook and how we might work together. That is an impossibly big question, so whoever wants to volunteer to jump in on that, but go ahead.
Ben.
Sure.
He's been voluntold.
I'm also going to borrow heavily from one of our grantees, Dr. Rachel Kleinfeld. She might be in this room, from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. She's an expert and a leading thinker on political violence. So I would highly recommend anyone here sorry, Dr. Kleinfeld, to volunteer you out there. But we just had a short conversation at lunch right before this panel talking about what might happen with philanthropy's investments in the political violence and hate-fueled violence space post-election. I think that, to borrow her words, depending on who wins the election may have quite a big impact as to what philanthropy does. assuming one candidate takes control, there may be more violence moving from just a political violence sphere to maybe a state-sponsored violence space. And in that case, philanthropy may choose to be in a more defense posture. In another scenario, you may see philanthropy moving back towards what traditional issues that they may care about, whether it's on voting rights or climate or gender, whatever it may be. But it may shift away from hate-filled violence and political violence in general because people may think that the problem has therefore been solved. I think regardless of this, though, we may still have to do one big thing, which is remind philanthropy that even you might feel a little bit complacent with the scenarios that may happen, incidents of violence may still continue. And philanthropy, as you can tell from our different postures, Packard, we're very long-term oriented. We have 10 years planning, so we are probably still going to continue giving in the political violence space. But there may be others that are more short-term planning because that's the way that their organizations are structured. And in those cases, if they're based around certain major instances, like in Springfield, Ohio, or Butler County, Pennsylvania, or wherever, so on and so forth, whether it's looking to those local community foundations that can be more involved in the local areas, might be an area, looking at corporations that may be interested in those specific spaces. For example, we talk about in Springfield, Ohio, a lot of the folks who are migrants there work at pork industry places, right? So you might look at Tyson's, you might look at whatever else industries that care about those type of workers to get involved. So I think it's important as us for civil society to remind philanthropy that hate-filled violence, political violence will likely still continue, and the importance to continue investing in it regardless of who wins this election.
Yep. Thank you, Ben. And I will say for us, even if we are short-term catalytic funders, we know it's not going to disappear after Election Day. That's just, unfortunately, the world we are in right now. So I think for the field, I see a lot of investment in wraparound infrastructure support. I know if DFN is somewhere here, the Guardian Fund is a model that it's such a great model. They are thinking of digital, physical, legal, comms, all sorts of safety and security supports that the field will need for the long term to really have a robust and healthy democracy. And then for us at Pivotal over the next year, again, because we are on a shorter timeline and horizon, we are looking to build a taxonomy of political violence mitigation and prevention strategies that are focused on impacting women and women of color. So if you are in this room and that is a topic of your work, please come find me. I will be hustling after this, but come find me or reach out to Ryan, and that's going to be the next phase for us.
Yeah, and to build on both of those things, I think irrespective of federal election outcomes, there are things to watch. Obviously, under one scenario, potential of state-based violence, but also, I think there's a great deal to be concerned about between November and January, while we figure out what the future will look like. So that's one. Two is, again, irrespective of the outcome, the forces arrayed against inclusion and against many of the populations we're talking about are going to be persistent and are going to continue to exist in society, continue to organize in ways that are worrisome and threatening. So that's not going to go away. And one area that we haven't talked in great detail about here is that federal is not the only level where things are troublesome. So on a state-by-state level also, you see all sorts of state-based attacks on many of these populations. So you see this creeping move against DEI in states, against journalism in states, against freedom of speech in states. I think that depending on how our legislative bodies are comprised, you might see attacks against the social sector, which philanthropy is in, but also all of these nonprofits are in, under the guise of an anti-woke or an anti-woke agenda. So very worried about that moving forward. And this is not a positive vision, Ryan. I'm sorry you asked for a positive one, but I'm known for leaving people with their hair on fire, I hope. but you know, there's things to watch, and I guess the only the positive note would be, I think in the face of that, some sort of concerted effort that's not orchestrated but coordinated among pro-democracy, pro-inclusion forces should be mounted, and there's room for doing that sort of thing.
And then, look, just to jump in on that, I want to give a special shout out to Carly Chan, who's sitting back there. She helps lead an organization called the Democracy Protection Network.
Yeah.
Democracy Protection Network is supported by many of us here and other large foundations. The idea is that post-election, or even now, many organizations that are civil society right now might be getting attacks, whether it's legal attacks, communications PR attacks, website cybersecurity attacks, so on and so forth, maybe even threats to physical security, as we've mentioned here. What the Democracy Protection Network is being stood up to do right now is to offer either very low cost or free services to any organization working in the democracy space that will get any of these attacks. So it might be a Department of Justice FOIA request, or it might be some kind of, someone Twitter bombing you for one of your main events, or someone wanting to do some kind of a threatening physical posture. Any of these kind of threats to yourself. Many of us foundations are supporting this Democracy Protection Network and highly encourage you to take advantage of these low to free cost services that are currently already available.
Brad, you've got 8 minutes till I grill you on a positive vision, but for now, let's stick with this, because I think Ben and Carla alluded to this too. You make this really important point about protecting the protectors. As I started this session with the point that we all don't have necessarily the support that we would like to do this really hard work, and that includes putting ourselves out there among people to be seen by people who might be perceive us as enemies, right? And so not only do we have to do the hard work, but then we have to protect ourselves on top of that, which is also resource intensive. And so, and there's some people here with resources to protect the protectors, and let's shout out Brightlines, who can help you get your information off the internet so folks can't find you, nefarious folks can't find you. The NGO ISAC is a collaborative that supports nonprofits for cybersecurity, and so many more. But take a second, Ben, because you're talking about there's a network for this too. And so is there an infrastructure that those out here can plug into, where maybe a foundation or other resource providing entity provides those resources, so we don't have to worry about kind of our already thin budgets paying for this protection? Is there you mentioned one of those options, but is there kind of a movement building toward that direction?
Yeah, I would say so. So again, Democracy Protection Network is doing this for any organization that's in democracy space, whether or not you're being funded by the Packard Foundation or not. We're here to support the field, and so Democracy Protection Network is legal services, rapid response communication, physical security, cybersecurity, and even mental health support. So any of these that you're interested in, talk to Carly back there. Secondly, if you are a grantee of the Packard Foundation, whether it's in democracy or any other field, we also are offering in-house supports for all of those legal, comms, so on and so forth. So I know that many of my other peers here at the different foundations may also offer that to their own grantees as well. I also know there are some organizations that are doing that in the C4 in a more political partisan space too. So I think there are different infrastructure networks being stood up at this moment as we speak. And so if you're looking for it and you don't know where to go, talk to any of us here, talk to Carly. We're happy to point you in the correct direction.
Yeah, and on the C4 side, that's where our supports are. So we are Trusted Elections Fund, Trusted Elections Action Fund, their C4 arm, is also one of the partners that we support, and they also are really taking a look at the rapid response post-election. And I should also shout out one of our grantee partners working on political pipelines, Pipeline Fund. They have a partnership with Democracy Security Project, another entity providing direct services and training to those on the political side, so candidates, electeds, who are looking for safety and security resources.
Thank you so much for all that support. I want to make sure before we let folks go to the next session, I'm going to give Brad a hard time about finding this positive way to go forward together. Just to mention, from the Bedrock perspective, we are nervous about the next several months, and as Brad alluded to, and others have alluded to, there is an institutionalized effort to take away freedom and put people at risk. There is a playbook. There are organizations. This is institutionalized now among many different stakeholders. the threats we face aren't just going away. And so in turn, we have to institutionalize the response to these threats to prevent them from metastasizing. So in terms of kind of how we do that, how we make this, you know, like to say in the kind of nutrition space, it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle, right? So how do we say prevention is not a thing you do 2 weeks after an attack, nor is it a thing you do just to eradicate hate. It's the lifestyle that we all do together going forward. What's the kind of takeaway vision for how the stakeholders here can work with their friends in institutional philanthropy, including those on the stage for what will probably be the long haul, unfortunately?
And you're seriously asking me this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Positive
Yeah, and
as
it has
possible,
to be
Brad.
positive, Brad.
Has to be positive?
It
Well,
has to be
here,
positive.
thank you, Carla. I take great heart in some of the really standout organizations that already exist and are part of the ongoing pushback and resistance effort, highly effective. So I'm thinking about Protect Democracy, whose leader is a MacArthur awardee. I want to call him a MacArthur Genius Award, but you don't do that anymore. The Brennan Center, these national, highly impactful organizations that are already part of the resistance and more joining. So we meet them every day, and they all know that this is a long-term thing. They're in it for the long haul. So that's one. I have great hope from that. Second is if you again, it's not about a particular electoral outcome, but if you look at the early voting that we're seeing already, where individual people are turning out to vote in places where there's early voting in record-breaking numbers in Georgia, Pennsylvania, where we're in, it means to me that everyday people are activated to care and are turning out to do something in a way that they're not even used to doing. It used to be you go on election day, and now they're early voting. So I take great heart in that. And thirdly, I take great heart in the power and voice of youth and Generation Z and their ability to self-organize, to create messages that cut through, that go viral, that are carried from place to place. I think that those three things are places that I see hope. Do they amount to a vision, Ryan? I don't know if they do.
I love the vision, Brad. It was visionary, and yeah, perfect. Last words from Ben or Carla.
Yeah, I would say on a positive note, and this is from Dr. Kleinfeld as well, that overall the incidence of political violence in the last couple of years have decreased. You know, from the heights of 2020 to 2021, we've seen a real actual decrease, and I think it's in no small portion due to the work of the folks here. We have seen so many community organizations pop up in the last few years. I mean, look at the organizations like ours, Packard Foundation. We began doing political violence work in the last 2 years since the insurrection. I know the foundation I used to work at called the Houston Endowment started entering the democracy space after 2021 as well. So a lot of folks are getting involved, and it seems like the work is starting to bear fruit, and it's something that we need to continue doing. I'll even highlight, like, in the face of mass craziness, the tragedies of the 2 assassination attempts, as awful and as horrible as they were, there was no mass reprisals, right? And you think about that as partially in fact of we as a people still largely do not believe that violence is the answer, regardless of how polarized our country is right now. And so for us to be able to continue to push forward with this, I'd call it like optimism and sense of hope, is something that we inherently as a people continue to have, and to not, don't take our foot off the gas pedal and keep going in this hard work.
I will just double down on that. A vast majority of Americans do not support political violence. And at the end of the day, most people don't want chaotic lives. It's like that simple. They want safety, they want security. So there's the burgeoning field both on the donor side and the practitioner side as I look across all the folks here who are doing incredible work. And then for those who do want to learn more about policy solutions, I'll just throw the 2. One I mentioned earlier, which is campaign funds for security. The other is address confidentiality. It exists in most states. If we can expand that to protect public officials and our election workers, I think that will also go a really long way.
Thank you all so much. My key takeaway here is institutional philanthropy is not a monolith. They're humans, and from those humans on stage, I hear love and support for this community. So thank you all for that leadership, and thank you for your partnership. For those in the audience, if you're a funder, there's a super duper awesome funder session in about 2 minutes. So I hope you'll find your way there. If you're a practitioner, I will be at the targeted community session, but otherwise, thank you for everything you're doing, and we can do this together. I know we all don't have enough support, but we can support each other. And in this event, I feel the love and feel that support. So thank you all for that sense of community.
And thank you, Ryan, for moderating.